My brothers, good evening, and welcome to the Craftsmen Online Reading Room. My name is Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce. Tonight's presentation is being recorded for playback on our YouTube channel and for a future Craftsmen Online podcast episode. Craftsmen Online is a New York State initiative founded in 2020 by our Grand Master, Most Worshipful Stephen Adam Rubin, to connect brethren with leadership development, Masonic education, and celebrate the history of New York Freemasonry, along with the special men who have served and continue to serve our ancient and gentle craft. Before we begin tonight's program, a reminder that the experiences, comments, opinions, and views that will be shared during this evening are those of individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, or Masonic authority. To join our program, please feel free to submit your question by using the comment feature on YouTube, and we will answer your question at the conclusion of our discussion. For now, please give your attention to my co-host, Brother Jason Short, who will introduce our guest and the reading selection for this evening. Brother Jason?
Thank you, Brother Michael. Good evening, listeners. Tonight, we will be discussing a selection from The Craft Perfected, Actualizing Our Craft by Brother Dr. John S. Nagy, published by Promethean Genesis Publishing. I'm very excited to be able to have Dr. John Nagy here tonight as our guest to discuss the opening section of this book, and really am honored to introduce you all to Dr. John S. Nagy. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Brother Jason, and as much as you are honored, I'm feeling honored and privileged to be here once again talking now with you and also Brother Arce on a topic that it's near and dear to my heart.
Oh, wonderful. I'm really interested, John, to know what drove you to Freemasonry.
Oh God, I continually ask that question every day. How did I get here? Oh gosh. I remember reading as a kid about the Masons, but it was always something that was many, many years ago, long before I was born, and it never, ever crossed my mind that they were still in existence. And I stumbled across a few Masonic lodges in my time, but I didn't even know if they were landmarks or if they were active or not. It just never occurred to me to think that they were active. Like moose lodges and elk lodges, I saw Masonic lodges, and I didn't even give them a second thought. And I didn't have any Masons in my family, nor did I have any Masonic friends that I was aware of. And I found out through lots of dinner conversations and imbibing with my neighbor next door, Jose, that he was a Mason. And he and his family invited me over for dinner, and we'd talk philosophy and history. And I'd ask him, how do you know so much about all this stuff? And, is there anything that I could read? And of course, he was waiting for me to ask those questions. So he gave me books to read, and one of them was Born in Blood. And he had indicated once again that he was a Mason, and we had some great times talking, but it never occurred to me to even join. It was just, again, Mason out of Cuba, 17th degree long form, as in you had to wait a year before you go through each degree. And it just never occurred to me that they existed here in the U.S. It just never crossed my mind. And Jose told me he was moving away. And on the day he was moving, he grabbed a hold of me and he grabbed my hand as only a lion would know, and I didn't know, but as a lion would know, pulled me in and whispered something very strange in my ear. And he said, "You're not going to understand this until you hear it the next time. And you'll understand the significance of what I'm sharing with you. You are a Mason. You just haven't joined yet." And then he said, "Seek them out when you're ready. And you'll realize that what we've been talking about is not just history. It's a reality." And I didn't forget what he said. And there was a brother, I was going through some religious lessons, a fellow ordained minister, and we started talking about Black Ops. And the next thing you know, we started talking about Freemasonry. And I said to him, my neighbor was a Freemason, it is a Freemason, and he moved away and he said, "I'm a Mason. I just don't know it. I haven't joined yet." And he said, "Well, what do you think about that?" Well, and of course he was setting me up. And I said, "Well, how do you join such an organization?" And he pulls out an already filled out petition. And he said, "I've been waiting for a long time to hand you this." And it was literally, it was pocket worn. He had filled it out when he realized, I was Masonic material, and he kept it in his pocket until I asked. And when I tell you pocket worn, literally, he folded it out, and he had already filled it all out, all my information, and he was just waiting for his signature.
Oh.
So that's my, how did I stumble into Freemasonry? I was set up.
Well, that's wonderful. I love that you had been recognized as a Mason. You were the one that needed to realize that. I think that's a really universal theme for everybody who comes up to the craft. I was eager to ask you that question largely because you're such a prolific writer. You published, well over a dozen books on the craft pertaining to everything from understanding the words to your own self-actualization development. It's really impressive, John, to see your body of work and to see how passionate you are about leading brethren to light. Why did you begin to write and publish your work? What drives you?
I have a tendency to investigate when I have a curiosity. And in my tendency, when I came into Freemasonry, I was expecting more than I got. I memorized the catechism and gave it back as I was required to do the proficiencies. And I sat in lodge for about 3 months, and I finally went up to the secretary at the time, Don Bell. And Don Bell heard what I had to say about wanting more education, and he said, "Great, write something up and present it in lodge. I'll make sure we put some time aside for you." And I just looked at him and I said, "So if I want education, I've got to provide it?" He said, "Yeah, you've got to basically, if you want something, you've got to go for it. And while you're going for it, entertain the rest of the brothers and enlighten them on what you find, and we'll make sure you have some time." So I said, "Okay, challenge accepted." I figured I'd run with it. And the very first presentation I did was the orders of architecture. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that it made absolutely no sense to me whatsoever why we had the orders of architecture in the masonry, other than the fact they were made of stone. Why are they going into such detail about the differences between one column or pillar and another? And I said, "Well, is there a difference between a column and a pillar?" And then I went into that because I saw some people referring it to one versus the other. And as I investigated, I come to find that, and I'll, this was a mind-blowing experience. If you take a look at what each of these represent, these orders of architecture, you come to realize that it's a Masonic path. Now, let me entertain the notion in, words here. We come in as a Tuscan, the plainest and most simplest of pillars, unadorned. And there we will remain should we not do the work that is laid out before us in the 3 degrees. However, should we involve ourselves and engage in the work and work on our respective wisdom, strength, and beauty as represented by the 3 Greek pillars, and work on all 3 such that wisdom, strength, and beauty is now internalized, we thus become the composite masterful pillar. So from the 1 comes the 3, and then the 3 become unified by the 1. It is the 3 that we involve ourselves in at large, working on wisdom, beauty, and strength. And if we don't, we remain the Tuscan. However, if we internalize all the attributes that are within the 3 degrees in order to have internalized our wisdom, strength, and beauty, they become unified and become the masterful composite pillar. And you would think that I would have incorporated that in my first lecture on the orders of architecture, but quite honestly, it took me about 15 years to wake up to that reality hidden in plain sight. However, what got me involved? I had a curiosity, I had an itch to scratch, and as a result of doing the study on the orders of architecture, I recognized also that it is a brilliant example of differentiation. They're pillars, they're columns, however you want to define them, depending on where you are and where research you've done. And as you research them, you recognize that, well, you can refer to them as columns or pillars. However, if you want to differentiate between one and the other, you have to learn linguistic differentiation. And as a result of that linguistic differentiation, you start to recognize the differences between the pillars. And they are the introduction to the 7 liberal arts and sciences, which basically means you have to, once you get the example of the differences between the senses and the columns and the 3 steps that are preceding those 5 steps, you then get into the 7 steps and recognize each and every one of those have to be differentiated using language. What's the difference between grammar, rhetoric, and logic? What is the difference between math, geometry, music, and astronomy? What's the difference between the first 3 and the last 4? Well, the first 3 focus on symbols as words. The last 4 represent symbols as they appear as numbers. The first 3 represent what you have to learn in order to understand Scripture. The last 4 have to be internalized and understood in order for you to understand the book of nature. And so on and so forth. So what drives me? I have an unbelievably deep thirst for trying to understand how all this fits together. And Freemasonry gave me ritual that I pull apart. I first start with what Freemasonry offers me and the inbred material that you'll find within the craft. And then I venture out and discover other things that are supportive of the topics and find the nuances that are not within Masonry and not inbred in Masonry and sometimes influenced by Masonry. I'll give you a simple example of that. The freestone. What is freestone? And you start going down that road of what freestone is, and if you do enough research, you recognize that a lot of what it is that Freemasonry put out there about freestone is not true, particularly if you take a look within the glossaries of stonecraft. And if you look at some of the literature, beautiful examples of how we within the craft understand things, because it's, again, inbred information. And when you go outside the craft, you start to get a much deeper understanding of the depth of what is being offered that is not being offered within the lodge itself. So I start with the craft offered materials first, and then I venture outside, and then I look at the etymology of words, and I look at scholarly works on what it is that I'm looking at, examining, and I find all sorts of beautiful gems. And I bring them back and I write about it. And I asked about what got me writing. I like to be really clear on what it is that I'm learning. And I learned very early on that if I write things down, I don't lose track. And if I write things down, I could take a look at what I wrote and say, is that clear enough? No, it's not. So I scratch it out and I rewrite it. And I may rewrite that puppy 100 times before I get it down to the nugget that I really want to communicate, which, if you are familiar with my writing, I'm concise and I don't mix words. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that what you're reading in that one sentence might have been 31 pages of research. And I'll give you one example of that. I did in building Hiram, I had one line that wine is not necessarily fermented. 31 pages. I found in research that there were 6 words in the Greek Bible, the Greek writings of the Bible, the New Testament. There's 6 different versions for wine. 2 are fermented, 2 are what is called fresh or unfermented wine, and 2 are fermented or not fermented, depending on the context of how it's used. How do I know that? 31 pages of research for that one line in the book. I hope that answers your question. I didn't meander too far.
No, not at all. I think it's amazing that I can really relate to that, and learning by doing. I think a lot of brothers who come into the craft are elevating themselves when they take on a part in ritual and they have to dig just a little bit deeper. Once we approach the craft like that, it starts to become an adventure. Brother Arce, do you have any questions?
Yeah, it's so good to hear John's voice again, Brother John. I've missed chatting with you. And as you've talked, I've always appreciated his writing style and knowing his background with that engineering background and how he has a very critical and analytical and gets right into what we kind of miss in between the lines sometimes. And being able to go through the selection, and for those that are just listening to this reading room, if you're wondering, I didn't get a chance, you can still visit our website, craftsmenonline.com, click on the reading room page, and get the selected materials from the Craft Perfected. In the chapter that we have to review tonight, you really get into the perfect ashlar. And as you said, one page is probably 33 of research that you put into it. But one of the simple questions that kind of came to me was the term perfect ashlar. I know this has been something that kind of trips up a lot of brothers as they're going through their degree work, because they feel that the pursuit of crafting a perfect ashlar can sometimes kind of create conflict in the mind of am I trying to be perfect or am I trying to obtain perfection? What's your definition, and what was the research that you found in that?
Well, it's not my definition. It's the definition that was used, the meaning that was used in the 1800s when the perfect ashlar was sewn within ritual. And that happened about 1812. It appeared there, and it was a transition because in around 1760, Brother Preston, he used the term smooth. And what happened was by 1812, when it finally got put into print, we're talking about the perfect ashlar. So it appeared 1812 at about that time. That being said, it was in the Monitor, so I'm not sharing anything that isn't already out there. What happened between 1812 and present day is enough brothers did not know the history of the word perfect to understand what it meant. And as a result, they put their own definition, their own meaning. And what you hear coming out of the mouths of many unschooled, only informed, but unschooled, uninvestigating brothers is that the word perfect relates to flawlessness. And you'll hear all sorts of comments like, oh, we'll never be a perfect ashlar. And, perfection is impossible. Only one person in history has ever been perfect. And the fact of the matter is they're allowing their religious beliefs and their upbringing to influence the meaning that they put into the word. They come in with preconceived notions. They try to make sense out of it rather than investigating and recognizing that in the 1800s it had a very specific meaning. And when you understand and listen to our ritual, you understand immediately the connection between what was intended to be communicated and what is being communicated through ritual, which is absolutely being ignored by people who have preconceived notions. So it does not mean or ever has ever meant to mean flawlessness. It meant something utterly different. And if you take the time to research it, you understand immediately that what it is that's being communicated is self-defeating to our craft. We are supposed to be a perfected ashlar by the time we are in our fellow craft level. And you just take a look at simple things like what Stonecraft did with a perfect ashlar. When it first came from the quarry, it was roughed. It was a rough ashlar, and they would work on it, which means that as they were working on it, it was a common ashlar. And the moment that they perfected it, it was only at that juncture would they put some sort of mode of lifting on it to lift it and raise it to where it is supposed to be put into the building. But you do not raise an ashlar that's not perfected. You always raise one that is exactly what you need for where it's going to fit, because you don't need to have that stuff being chiseled out and smoothed out when it finally reaches its destination. So if you go back allegorically to what's going on with our particular metaphorical representation of all this, if you perfect your ashlar by doing your entered apprentice work, you thus raise it by climbing the stairs. And that's how that ashlar actually gets raised, is by climbing the stairs and studying and internalizing all the necessary understanding of the 7 liberal arts and sciences. So it is not your brothers who raise you. Technically, you are supposed to raise yourself, and the raising ceremony is an acknowledgement, a celebration of the work you did to raise yourself at that point.
I'll have to admit, I was one of those brothers that almost literally tripped over the perfect ashlar because of the placement of where it is in Lodge. And when it's told to you, like, you are the rough ashlar, and here's where the perfect ashlar is, and as you're working your way to the east and going through all of that, that's an easy physical mistake to do. But also, I really appreciate your definition, and it's one that I find myself having to explain as well, because it is so easy for brothers to interpret the ritual and just hear that. But as you said, they're informed, but they're just under, I love that term, informed but under.
And there you have just revealed the actual definition, the meaning assigned to the word by our brothers in the 1800s. Informed. Mm-hmm. And to be informed, you have to go through the entered apprentice work and inform yourself as to the nature and direction that you have to take to get to the next level. So you have to be informed as a brother, and then you further inform yourself during the fellowcraft work if you actually take the time to climb the stairs and do the work that is espoused by our ritual.
Right. You go from being informed to being well informed. Yeah. I really love this book. In your writing style, it really unfolds like an adventure novel. And I can understand from what you've said so far how you approach the work, and your curiosity keeps leading you along. I I know that there's a lot of brothers out there, and the big challenge that you present at the beginning of this is the misinterpretation based on modern words and definitions. Now, I see countless speculative interpretations of the symbols and lessons born out of our operative roots. The ashlar is a wonderful example, as the interpretation of even its physical representation changes across jurisdictions. We have an oblong ashlar in one place and a cubic stone in another place. But I wonder then, who's to say what's right or wrong once we get into that level of speculation? Like, where does the buck stop, and how do we know when we're approaching the work if we're properly interpreting what has been put down in stone?
No, just look at the reality of it, Brother Jason. Look at the reality. A cubic stone that's got smooth faces, it's useless for anything other than a paperweight.
Yeah.
It is literally something that does not belong in a building. Everybody who has ever worked with cement knows that a smooth face is the worst thing you put cement on, because once it dries, it peels right off. And if you've ever had any spare cement that was laying on something like smooth plastic, you know that once it dries, you peel it right off, and it's nice and glossy, but there's no adhesion whatsoever.
Yeah.
So right away, logically, that it makes no sense whatsoever.
Right.
If you look at standard building practices. But if you look at the history, you'll notice that the original ashlar that was mentioned in ritual back in 1692, I think it was the Perpend ashlar. And if you go to Mackey basically says that you got a lot of romantic romance novelers writing about Freemasonry, and each and every one of them has got absolutely no credibility whatsoever. They are romanticists, and they want to believe that their depiction of a perfect square ashlar, being a perfect cubic form, is somehow a romantic notion that we need to be shooting for. And yet, when you read more, he says the original writers who used the word perfect ashlar meant it exactly to mean the Perpend ashlar. It is a fully informed ashlar. Even if we look at the stone, it's informed. It's in the perfect shape for it to do the job that needs to be done. It's suitable for the builder's use.
Uh-huh.
And the Perpend ashlar is like a brick dimension. When you look at the height is a little bit shorter than the width, the depth, but the length is much longer.
Right. You would never really be able to build with a perfect cube. Other than maybe a stone somewhere, it doesn't make any sense.
Cornerstones are what are used, but even then, they don't use cornerstones that have the height the same as the width, because it's unstable. It does not do a builder good to have something that height and width and length are all the same. You must shorten it, because it's construction-wise, it is unstable. It is not a good building practice, unless, of course, you're doing it for a cornerstone that looks pretty. You want it to stand out as, oh, look at that pretty stone. It's nice and glossy and everything. But where the cement is adhering, it's rough. It has to be. Or that puppy, once the cement has dried, will slide very easily out of place.
Right.
There is no adhesion. So what you're seeing is the fascia, the smooth face, but the surfaces that are aligned with the other stones where the cement is being used as adhesive, it's not. It's all textured, and is purposely textured so that adhesion occurs, so that puppy does not slip out.
Yeah.
I could just imagine one of those puppies slipping out at the worst time, perhaps during a landslide and or an earthquake. All of a sudden, it just rocks out of place, and you kind of look and say, well, that's not a smart move to not have no texture on that so the cement doesn't hold it in place.
Sure.
But it's also an interesting symbolic look at us as people, is that we want to project a perfect front, but we all have somewhat of a rough backside, so to speak.
And you're using the word perfect. What you really mean is flawless. And the problem is we use the two words interchangeably. And when it comes to Masonic practice, we've got to stop doing that, because perfect literally means informed. And if you look throughout our ritual, there are terms: inform the Tyler, inform the worshipful master, inform, you not yet being fully informed, your brother who is informed, will instruct you. And it's all about bringing brothers in and members in and informing them as to our practice, our trade, and our path. And until you are at that stage, you're just a common ashlar. And if you never work on any of it, then you're a rough ashlar. Notice I threw that little common ashlar term in there, because if you're working on yourself, and here's the kicker. Well, I'll always be because I'm always learning something new. And the fact of the matter is, if what you're learning has nothing to do with your apprentice work, it has nothing to do with the perfect ashlar. The perfect ashlar, the work that is involved at the entered apprentice level is specific. You are divesting your vices and superfluities, and at the same time, because you can't do that without investing virtue, you are setting your plumb. You are committing within the length of your cable toe. You are learning time management, emotional management, and a whole host of other things. And as long as you're working on that, you're a common ashlar. But when you've worked on it, you've learned how to do it, and you've mastered that. And yeah, you might have extra stuff to work on, but when you've mastered the ability to do all the stuff that you're working on, you've perfected your ashlar, and you're ready now for the fellowcraft. And if you're learning fellowcraft stuff, you're no longer an apprentice, and you're no longer considered an imperfect ashlar, because you're working on a whole different set. You have been informed. Now you're going for refinement.
Huh.
And I can tell you that is one of the most deflating things you can tell brothers, that the work will never get done. The work is always incomplete. The temple will never be completed. You'll never be a perfect ashlar. And we're giving out titles left and right while we're saying this. Here's an AA title, here's a fellowcraft title, here's a master mason. But Hank, you'll never be perfect, right? You'll never be masterful.
Not in this life.
Here's a title, we want you to wear it, but wink, wink, you're never going to really earn that title. And it's the most demeaning and deflating thing to tell our brothers. Yeah. Hey, if you did your divestment work and learned how to do that, and you come across a new one, you still got to work on that, but you know how to do it. Well, you've mastered how to do that. You got the point where you can identify new ones and whip those puppies out as fast as you can, because you know how to do it. You've mastered it. And as far as virtue, when you get your virtues internalized, you know how to apply it. You set your plumb. Here's my new priorities. Here's my old priorities. How do they jive? Great. Let's move on. And time management, good God, how many times we have people they're master masons, and they've gone up, and they've earned higher titles, and they're just lousy at time management. They've not finished their entered apprentice work, which, oh, by the way, we call those ruffians. Because they accept things that they haven't earned. But I'll stop. I'll get off my soapbox.
Well, it's a huge misconception, I think, and that is a huge part of the foundation of your book, is addressing that misconception. And I love the fact that you pointed out. I think that by pushing off our perfect nature to some other life or some celestial version of ourself, it becomes an excuse not to work daily on yourself as the ashlar. Some days our finish is a little bit more polished. Some days maybe it's a little bit more smooth. Maybe it's a bit rough or hammered or axed. You have a section later in the book that talks about 20 different finishes, and brings to my own mind that not every day has to be a polished surface, and that's okay. When you're well informed and you can understand, you can move from our surface understanding to more of an esoteric understanding of life, which brings me to my next big question for you, John, is I really admire this grounded approach to understanding our craft, and through the progressive investigations, the very exoteric meanings of words, you seem to be able to move to more esoteric understanding and wisdom. So I'm curious what your definition of exoteric and esoteric are, and where or how does a brother progress from one understanding to the next? How do we become well informed?
Well, I do an entire hour on the esoterica, etc. And I talk about the actual reasons for the word, where it comes from, how it was originally used, how it's used today. It's used throughout history, along with, okay, how do you know if you're participating in an esoteric or a pseudo-esoteric organization? And there's actually 5 levels, and we go through them with you. Very first level is you're informed. That's it. You have absolutely no understanding of what the information is that you were informed about, but you, if asked, you can say, hey, here's the information I was informed of. That's level 1. And by the way, I call these the guard dogs. They don't understand why. They don't understand. All they do is follow through and do exactly what they've been told because they've been informed that this is important. Then you got the second level. Not only do you have the information, but you've been told why. Now, you may not understand why, but if anybody ever asks you, well, here's the information and here's why, the information is being provided. I don't understand why, but I have the why provided along with the information.
The reasoning.
Well, yeah, but it's not the understanding. Why do we salute? Oh, it's to honor the worshipful master. Why do we not go between the altar and the worshipful master? Why do we not cross that path? Well, because we were told that no one should get in, and cross that path, right? That's the reason why. It's sacred territory. And of course, then comes the usual jokes about laser-bearing sharks and quicksand and lava. But if you understand why, you start to understand that the 3 great lights represents the work that a man should be doing, the relationships that a man has, and the law he should be abiding by. Those are the 3 great lights. The square literally is the work we do. The compass represents our relationships with our brothers and others. And the Holy Writ is the law we are abiding by. And no one in this world should come between you and your work, your relationships, and the law that you want to abide by. If you have anybody eclipse that, you should tell them stop that. And you should in turn not do that to others. Now, by the way, welcome to level 3. You not only have the information, you understand why. You have the why, but you now understand. It's because it symbolically represents what we should not interfere with in other people's lives or allow other people to interfere with in our lives. Level 3, my brother. So you not only have the information and you know the why, but now you understand the why. That's level 3. And there are tidbits sprinkled throughout ritual in the lodge that people are informed and they've been told why, but they don't understand. You now do, Brother Jason. How's it, you're now lost in thought. How does it feel to be at level 3 on that?
Oh, it feels great.
And we ought to be having that feeling in every single brother that comes through. They ought to be able to look at that and just sit back and just digest the joy of that connection, because it's the way we're supposed to be living. And all it is a tradition in the lodge that has absolutely no meaning whatsoever other than, oh, we're not supposed to do that. But if you understand why, you realize that's symbolic for how we would live our lives and not allow people to interfere and not interfere with others. All of a sudden it's like, holy crow, next level. How that little tidbit could reshape our fraternity, I don't know why it's not being shared. So, that's level 3. Level 4, esoteric, is you can derive the understanding and the why. You're now at a place where you are able to explain to another human being so that they comprehend the why and understand the why. And not only that, but you've just instructed them on how to instruct others so that the light will go on in their heart and their spirit. That's level 4. You are literally bringing people up to level 3. And if you're fortunate enough, if they're at level 3 and they see how you derived it, they may even take the ball and run with it and become a level 4 themselves. So level 4 is deriving the why. And level 5, you're deriving new whys, new information, new understanding. And you're trying to cultivate like a madman other level 4s and of the level 5s, because you're not going to be around forever. And if there's nobody to replace you at level 5, the craft will go back into what it normally does, which is usually operating at level 2, maybe level 3.
Yeah,
So-
I think what you just framed perfectly is the role of a Masonic educator in a lodge. We need more 5s, because I feel what you're saying is the problem that is in the craft right now is we have a lot of 1s and 2s.
We do. A lot of guard dogs. And unfortunately, there are not enough level 5s, nor is there enough support from the Grand Lodge down on level 5s. Level 5s are an unbelievably rare commodity within the craft, and yet we ought to try to cultivate as many level 4s and level 5s. I mean, literally, it should be our mission, because when you get to level 4, you become the kind of master and teacher that the craft actually is trying to cultivate. And yet, most all the craft that I've seen are very satisfied with level 1 and 2.
And I think a lot of that problem is because I always look at Freemasonry as kind of like the practice of Freemasonry, like one would practice law or medicine or religion in some instances. But what tends to happen in certain lodges in the culture is that they're very happy with practicing the form of Masonry that was taught to them. And if that form doesn't exist for the input of developing and becoming a teacher or a seeker, then you're just going to have a bunch of followers and no leaders.
Which we do. So, Brother Jason, you were asking about my understanding of esoteric. I was extremely disappointed with the talks that I heard about esoterica. And when I started asking myself the question, okay, here's what they usually share. Here's the definition of the word. Here's a bunch of examples. And by the way, here's a bunch of organizations that practice esoteric stuff. Never did I ever hear them tear this baby apart and explain, here are the levels of esoteric practice. Here are the levels of understanding and how a person can recognize what organization is esoteric and how might they be practicing. And if an individual actually is an esoteric individual, how would you know how would you be able to evaluate their level of esoteric knowledge? Well, so what I did was I put together a PowerPoint for myself so I'd better understand it. And as I put it all together, I said, hey, this is something that I can share with others that help them bring themselves up to the understanding that I want to be talking at, that level of understanding. And I gave you, within the last 10, 15 minutes, my best thoughts, an overview of my understanding of esoterica and how it applies to the craft and the organization itself.
I really appreciate it, Dr. John Nagy. This has been more than a treat. I am really excited that we're offering this opportunity to brothers for them to engage with your work, to read a section of the Craft Perfected. I am really hoping that it inspires them to not just read the selection, but to go out and get the book. Wondering if you have a place that you would like to direct brethren where they can find your work.
www.coach.net/building-builders with the two B's capitalized .htm. That's www.coach.net, all small letters, /building-builders.htm, and the building builders is the capital B on each of them.
Well, we'll make sure that the link for this is available for those listening to the podcast and also on the YouTube channel, so they should be able to click on that. But to kind of like bring this whole conversation together, because I'm going to use my engineering skills here, Brother John. We started the conversation with the 3 columns. The focus for the reading selection is around the perfect ashlar. I want to kind of enter one more thing that exists in that first degree, because we're kind of in that EA discussion level here. How does this relate to living stones and the idea of perfecting our minds to be living stones in lodges?
The very first thing that has to be understood has to do with the lessons that are actually intended. What are they? And the lesson is that at the level that we're talking about the perfect ashlar, we're talking about bringing order to the chaos of your heart. It is self-mastery. You are working on bringing yourself from childhood into adulthood, and you're maturing yourself. You're putting childish things aside, and what you are doing is doing all the work that is necessary to bring you to adulthood. How do we know this? It's laced throughout our ritual. The first 3 steps are emblematic of childhood, manhood, and age. Well, moving from the EA to fellowcraft is moving from childhood or youth to manhood, adulthood. And that lays the foundation for your temple. And it's really interesting because it's the first stage of your development. You must create a foundation, because the second stage is, now that you've brought order to the chaos of your heart, you now have to bring order to the chaos of your mind, your thinking, your head. And that's the fellowcraft work. You prepare to learn at the EA level, and it is learning how to learn at the fellowcraft level. And it's interesting, as you lay your foundation, you're not working with just one ashlar. We use the idiom of the perfect ashlar to denote the member. However, as you're doing work on yourself, you are putting several ashlars down as a foundation. One foundation is setting your plumb. The second foundation part stone is having to do with vices and superfluities, divesting them. And you've got to do that in tandem with your virtue building. Your working tools depend on all this work to be done. And as you internalize, by the way, you must internalize 17 working tools to get through the perfecting stage. If you go through the entire entered apprentice degree, there are literally 17 working tools that help you do the work to perfect your ashlar and bring yourself up to adulthood or manhood. Now, at the fellowcraft level, we're talking about other Ashlers. We're talking about all the Ashlers that are involved in grammar. And all the remaining 7 liberal arts and sciences, there are a multitude of Ashlers that have to be internalized. It's not just understanding the words, it's understanding the definitions, understanding that definitions are taken within the context of how the word is being used, yada, 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 that some words are used idiomatically, which basically means when you hear the terms kick the bucket, we're talking about dying. And so when you're kicking the bucket, you take it literally, you miss the point. So you then learn rhetoric skills that must be internalized as internalized skills, and each represents another Ashler that you put down upon the foundation of the entered apprentice work. And all these Ashlers are internalized as you are working on yourself at whatever level you're working at. And since they're all represent symbolic Ashlers, we become an array, literally a living network of stones that have been internalized. We refer to it as a living stone, but is a multitude of each and every one of those stones that we internalized, the virtues, the setting the plumb, the understanding of time management and emotional management, the understanding of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, in that order, by the way. And then we go through the quadrivium, and each of these, we internalize the rules, the understanding, how to use it, how to apply. And that right there prepares us to understand the Master's Word, because all the work that we are doing is intended for us to comprehend that the Master's Word is right before us, and to be able to understand what the Master's Word is saying, so that we can glean God's rules and designs for our ultimate purpose, which is to erect a spiritual building. And how do we do that? Well, everything that we do up to the point of completing our temple prepares us to understand the Master's Word, which allows us to glean all the rules and designs that we're able to comprehend based on the work that we did previously and what God reveals to us. And all that preparation is to erect a spiritual building. So how do we do that? Well, you mentioned the living stones, right? Well, we are definitely living stones at that point, and each and every one of those stones has to be used in order to erect our spiritual building. And that inlays the connection between the Ashlers that we talk about in ritual and us as living stones to erect that spiritual building that is agreeable to God's rules and designs as laid out in the great books of nature and Revelation. I hope that helps.
Applause.
Jason, are you in well mode?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your very grounded and logical approach to the craft. Have digested myriad different approaches to the craft, and sometimes they're really out there. And this is such a wonderful example of an interpretation of the work that we take on that is rooted in a presentation of the information that is supplied to each and every one of us.
Thank you, Brother Jason. I'm going to interrupt you. Put a bookmark in that. You originally brought up the interpretation. And I want to address that because it's extremely important for our brothers to hear this. There is a statement that is made. There are infinite interpretations. And that's a truth. That's the truth. There are infinite. For every one you come up with, you can come up with 5 more until you run out of words and imagination. What is not being followed up and stated is that although there is an infinite set, there exists an infinite set of interpretations, there exists a finite set of interpretations that actually do apply and which are valid for what was intended by what was being communicated to be interpreted.
That is a really wonderful way of putting it. I appreciate that, John. I appreciate that, brother. This has been a really illuminating evening here on the Craftsmen Online Reading Room. I want to thank again our brother John Nagy for his insight. Again, the book is A Craft Perfected, Actualizing Our Craft. I want to thank our digital Tyler, my co-host for tonight, right worshipful brother Michael Arce.
Thank you, brother.
Of course, wouldn't be Craftsmen Online if we didn't thank our Grandmaster in the state of New York, most worshipful Stephen Adam Rubin. Thank you for everything you do and supplying us a platform where we get to have such delightful and intellectual conversations pertaining to the work that we do.
My brother, we are each on our own journey that doesn't change with the color of our aprons, the initials that precede our name, or the numbers that follow. Yet too often, too much of our Masonic experience is consumed by the mundane yet necessary work of attending to the business of our lodges. While the social and charitable aspects of our craft are cherished parts of our tradition, they too can command an inordinate share of our time and efforts. But what of improving ourselves as men and masons? There is an undeniable thirst in modern Freemasonry for the esoteric knowledge entrusted to the care of well-informed brethren. For as long as the craft has existed, brethren have gathered together within lodges and without to exchange, share, offer Masonic insights, thoughts, and ideas. So I congratulate you, my brother, for your inquisitive mind, and thank you for joining us for Craftsmen Online's Reading Room, where Masonic scholars are always welcomed.